So like I said, we're going to kick this off by talking about basically the funding structure for Project Search, eligibility requirements for each of the funding partners. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll also talk about some recommended timeframes or timelines that people should be considering. So, we want to talk about specifically who we are in terms of the funding partners. So here in New Hampshire, we have vocational rehabilitation, who is the entity that I represent. We then have school districts and then developmental services, or the area agency. So you'll hear from each of us. We'll also talk about eligibility for each of our programs, or for the school district for special ed. And then, like I said, we'll also talk about some timeline recommendations that people should really look at considering if they want to consider Project Search. So I'm going to start this off by letting Dan and John talk about the school partnership in each of their regions for Project Search. And we'll start with the Concord School District.
Great, thank you. So in Concord, we have a little unique arrangement where we oversee Project Search that is housed at the hospital. We're involved from every step, from program development, with the vision, the procedures, the regulations, everything we do with our partnership with the hospital. We recruit the students, we interview them, we accept them to the program. I've had the pleasure of sitting with our students who want to be part of the program, and it's a joy to listen to them and what their aspirations are, and them being able to talk about having goals for themselves, which is great. And then we employ the lead special educator who oversees the program. We recruit business partners, and we have a nice group that meets monthly or quarterly now, actually, from business people from all walks of life, from the local government agency, the local Five Guys comes. There's people from the banking industry, people from the hotel industry, and we meet and we talk to all those partners about building up our capacity to have interns out in the community. And then, of course, we partner with Community Bridges, our area agency, and the Community Bridges hires our coaches, our job coaches in the program. We consult weekly. They consult weekly with all of our students. And they also provide funding for our students who have graduated over the age of 22. Best way for parents to get involved, if you are a Concord student or you are a student that comes to our Career and Technical Center, you can approach the case manager or the coordinator or the administrator in the building and talk to them about, when you set up your transition plans, about Project Search and how do you enter that. We have everything from pamphlets to information to a website that's all part of our district website. And students also get introduced through area agency or vocational rehab.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
John. And then I'll have Dan talk a little bit about the Nashua School District.
Yeah, so we're a little bit different. Our program is run through the Plus Company. I'm a member of the team, the core team as it's called, at Project Search. So I do a lot of things that John mentioned that he does, where we do our student interviews, we have our assessment day, the application process, orientation. Tomorrow night, I'll be attending our Project Search art show that will be in the atrium of the Hospital St. Joe's. If you're in the area, it's a great time. I think they have some music, some quartet playing and everything. We attend graduation and we support the students throughout. Part of my role on the core team is problem solving. So if there's a struggling youth that's there, could be challenging with completing tasks, or what may may present with them, we'll sit down and look at it, and I'll come from a special educator lens to see if there's any way we can help to kind of modify or change the task a little bit, or the list to help the students a little bit more. Most of our students do get referred through the area agencies, gateways. And then the Nashua School District, we heavily refer as well. I've had teachers going out the past couple weeks to do site visits to learn more about the program, so that they can understand what the needs are and the level by which the students need to be at, functionally and independently, to be successful in the program while at St. Joe's. The funding sources can be either from the school district if the student is still in school under the age of 22, and if not, it is through the area agency or other DHHS sources through a Medicaid waiver. Part of our core team is also Voc Rehab, the area agency, and the Plus Company representative, as well as a hospital representative, and really kind of go through all the different aspects of the program and ways to improve it. And we have a great team down there with 3 great instructors who run our Project Search program.
Thank you, Dan. Before we move on to the VR piece, and Dan or John or both of you can answer this. One of the comments that I wanted to make to the group, I think that's really important to point out to the audience about the school district component, are really kind of 2 pieces. One is that the school district component, that funding is only available to students who are still of high school age. So as both Dan and John mentioned, up to the age of 22. And the other piece I think to really point out is, while we have Nashua and Concord here represented, every school district that may potentially look to send students to Project Search may approach Project Search differently. So the way that Concord and Nashua does it may look a little different than the schools that your son or daughter may be attending. So with all of that said, Dan or John, do you have recommendations or suggestions for the families, on the line in terms of, some ways to approach their school team about, considering Project Search, maybe what, some timeframes might be to kind of think about that, or some ways to communicate interest?
Dan, I'll start, and then you can feel free to jump in. I think that the planning for Project Search starts early, so early and often. That's what we always say. So I think the first place to approach is really prior to that last transition year. So that 20th, 21st year in there, start talking to the team then about kind of what are your aspirations for your child, and where do you want to see them in attain, and are they appropriate for a program? Do they have that level of independence to be able to work in the hospital setting or other settings? So it's really start looking at, like I said, in the year prior to, about kind of when do you feel the kids, the child or the student is getting to that point of that self-independence where they're looking to do something to possibly be able to go out and have a position that builds their skills to someday be employed. And it's kind of, it has to start early to start that. And the process typically starts really about mid-year. We start looking at our next enrollment for the following year.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add is because at the completion of Project Search, we want students to be able to move on to something in their adult life and placement. The Project Search process, yes, a year before, but the transition process, 1 or 2 years before, so that, those Medicaid waivers are done in place, all the appropriate documentation is done in support of the area agency, so that when Project Search is completed, there is a placement opportunity after that. So it's not just a time filler and they learn good skills and then there's nothing after project search.
Mhm. Yeah, and well, thank you both for that. And I think as you folks will see as we get later on into the presentation, we kind of culminate with the timing of things, and to really be thinking about that when you're considering project search for your child. So the next funding partner is through vocational rehabilitation, and that is who I represent. So in a very basic, in a very basic nutshell, we are a program here in New Hampshire that assists people with disabilities, both students or young people and adults, by helping them to enter into the workforce, and hopefully helping them to find a meaningful career. And on the flip side of that, we also see business as kind of our client or customer as well. So hopefully by working with the individuals with disabilities that we're working with, we're also matching their skills and abilities with business and the workforce, and what the workforce needs. So as a snapshot for the state of New Hampshire for vocational rehabilitation, from top to bottom, we are a statewide program. And we have 6 offices throughout the state. Our administrative office is in Concord, and inclusive in that office, we have programs that specifically serve individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing, as well as services for those who are blind and visually impaired. Relative to students or young people with disabilities, we approximately serve a little over 2,200 students per year. So to kind of give you a context of that number, I think on any given year of transition age students that are coded for special education, it's somewhere between 10 and 12,000 per year, and we serve about 2,200 or so of those students who are coded under special education. And then within vocational rehabilitation, we have who we consider specialty counselors. So those are vocational rehabilitation counselors that they're working with the transition age population. So between the ages of 14 to 22, we have counselors that specifically work with the lower incidence population. So those who are blind and visually impaired, as well as those who are deaf and hard of hearing. So, and then similarly, our mission and our charge is to help people to find meaningful employment, and hopefully through that they gain independence and financial stability because of the various different rehabilitation services that they will have received through or from vocational rehabilitation. So unlike special education, vocational rehabilitation is considered a eligibility-based program. So when a student is still in high school, special education services are an entitlement. But then when you move on into adult services, that's when you get into eligibility requirements. So for vocational rehabilitation services, the key factors that we look at for eligibility is that someone needs to have a documented disability that could either be physical, psychological, intellectual, or sensory. That disability or impairment needs to either, impede them from basically being able to obtain or maintain employment on their own. Similarly, can it be shown that having VR services are going to assist that person to either prepare for, secure, retain, or regain employment? And then can we also demonstrate that by having vocational rehabilitation services, that individual is going to benefit from those services, and then as a result, either become employed or stay employed as a result of having VR services in place. So, and I often say that relative to students and the eligibility for VR, in my view, that's a little bit easier sometimes than an adult. And the reason why I say that is because when a student is in school and is receiving special education services, as an example, they often have ready documentation that comes along with them in terms of that educational testing, that medical diagnosis, the IEP, and so on and so forth, that helps us to determine eligibility. So then when we start talking about the financial contribution that VR helps to provide for Project Search, this is when that individual has applied for and been determined eligible for our services, and who either has or will look to develop what we call an individual plan for employment. So that IPE is really the document that drives our work, much like the IEP with the school district, and the transition plan drives the work that the school district is doing with the student. So similarly, the student will develop an employment plan, or they'll maybe already have one in place if they're already eligible for VR when they're interested in Project Search, and they'll work with their VR counselor to include participation in Project Search as part of their IPE. The contribution that VR provides, that covers the cost of the career trainer at the host site. And the contribution that we provide also helps to support the initial cost to help that individual to find a job following Project Search. And then on a case-by-case basis, that we can also look to provide funding that will help to support the on-the-job support until either area agency support, financial support becomes available, or natural supports on the job begins. One of the things that I also want to add in terms of the contribution, going back to the school district part, is if your school district does agree to help with funding for Project Search, that portion is basically helps with the costs with the instructor. So and then I'll let Sheila talk about the area agency piece when we get to that point. So in looking at some specific VR considerations that I would encourage people to really be thinking about is, one, to reach out to your child or to the individual support team to express your interest in Project Search. You're going to want to connect with the VR counselor that covers the program nearest to you, either to begin the VR application process, so applying for services, or if they're already receiving services from VR, to discuss incorporating Project Search into their IPE. And I really recommend that these discussions take place before submitting an application to Project Search. So ideally, this is in December or January, prior to the next program starting in September. So, like we talked about last week, one of the timelines for Project Search is typically it's around now, maybe, in December, where the sites will start to have information nights about the following program year that starts in September. So the more time that we give ourselves to really look at planning and discussions and funding, the better off I think folks are going to be. And then these are just the different VR counselor contact information that we have for each region. So you'll have this information, their name, their email, the Project Search site that they're associated with, and their phone number if you want to reach out to them directly, if you don't already know them. So the next funding partner, and I'm going to turn it over to Sheila Mahan, is the area agency.
Hi, everybody. As you've been hearing all night long, Project Search really is a partnership, and the area agency is one of the partners. There are 10 different area agencies throughout the state. There are 5 Project Search programs, so not all areas of the state have a Project Search program. But the area agencies are responsible for providing supports and services to individuals who have a developmental or intellectual disability or an acquired brain disorder. Just like folk rehab, we are an entitlement. We're not an entitlement. We are an eligibility program. So people need to apply for supports and services with us in order to receive services from us. We have the next slide. Okay. I have a different order. All right. Or my header didn't come out. Okay. So in terms of eligibility for developmental services, any resident of New Hampshire who okay, sorry, these slides are different from what I had. So this is about payment for a project search, so I apologize. So students who are between the ages of 18 and 21 who are interested in project search, they really should partner with their school when it comes to applying for search. We want to make sure that students have maximized the benefit of their entitled education services. Schools would be responsible for paying for the tuition aspect of project search for students that are, again, still active in school, so up through the age of 21. For adults who have exited the school, who may be as young as 18, anywhere up to that 21, 22, they need to have communicated with their area agency prior to applying for project search to let the area agency know that the individual has completed their education and that they meet the minimum requirements, which we'll get to, and are on our projected needs list. This is so that the area agency can advocate for funding in order to support the person to go through the program. So this does take time and planning. Our funding is Medicaid funding, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. If we have somebody who has exited school and they're over 21 years of age, they need to have Medicaid, and they need to be on, or they need to be eligible for, the Developmental Disabilities Waiver. This is what allows us to provide community-based services such as supported employment, which is how we fund the project search program. All right. So in order to be in a project search program, applicants need to meet the following requirements. They have to currently be receiving services from their area agency. It could be pathways, it could be Monadnock Developmental Services, it could be community bridges, it could be, I always blank on the ones on the Seacoast community partners, it could be gateways, but they need to be connected with their area agency. One Sky too, thank you. The individual needs to have Medicaid, and again, they have to be open for the Developmental Disabilities Waiver. Again, that is how we fund the program. Voc Rehab funding is separate, and the Medicaid funding is for somebody who's outside of school. Now, if there was a student who, for some reason, left school in the middle of the year, the area agency may pick up that piece after they've left school, but again, that takes planning, and we need the Developmental Disabilities Waiver to be in place. And also, as you just heard from Tina, we need to have individuals who have a current application for, or they're receiving active services with vocational rehabilitation. These are the elements that we need to have in place to ensure that there is funding to support the person through the program, and actually after the program too, as we look to provide follow-along supports for folks. Next slide. All right. So if you're not working with your area agency, if your son or daughter has not applied, call them tomorrow morning. Okay. Any resident of New Hampshire is eligible for services who has a developmental disability, but we need to have documentation that their disability is related to an intellectual disability or cerebral palsy or autism, a specific learning disability. That disability is going to impact their ability to be successful in school, in employment, in community activities. It needs to happen before the age of 22 and can be expected to continue to have an impact on the person. For somebody who is over the age of 22 and below the age of 64, not that we would take anybody that old into Project Search, but if they should have a head injury as a result of a car accident or a fall, then they would be eligible for services potentially through our acquired brain disorder waiver. We don't typically have a lot of individuals who go through the Project Search program, although it is possible because we tend to take adults up to about age 34, 35. So someone may have a head injury that occurs after the age of 21, but before the age of 34, who might be interested in the program. And all the information on this is on the DHHS website under developmental services. If you wanted to take a look at what the eligibility criteria are, if you are not connected with your area agency, call us, ask for an intake. There's absolutely no cost for the intake. And then we'll be working with you, school district, your physician's office in order to gather the information that we need to determine eligibility. All right, next slide. So you need to be connected with the area agency, and then you also need to have Medicaid and the DD waiver. So in the area agency system, Medicaid is our primary funder. And the DD waiver, as it's known, or developmental disabilities waiver, is the mechanism by which Medicaid funds are able to be used for community-based services. So there's applying for Medicaid and then also for the DD waiver. So they're the same but different. We're going to need, when you are applying with Health and Human Services, you're going to need to have proof of the individual's disability and also financial information. They're going to take a 5-year look back to see what somebody has for resources to determine whether or not they meet the financial eligibility requirements. So this takes time. So if somebody is looking at going through the Project Search program, you need to be working on this 8 months before, if you haven't even applied with the area agency system, and that might be cutting it kind of close at that point. I will speak for MDS. We can't take people into the program unless they have these pieces in place. And even for a student that is in school and the school is paying, we want to know that these pieces are in place because we want to make sure that there's a continuum of services for the individual when they leave Project Search, and that they may need to have somebody on site providing supports and services to them. VR can help out in a short term. Somebody needs a job coach, but if somebody were to need longer term services, we would want to make sure that they have these pieces in place. Now, this can all be very confusing for families, and I would encourage them to reach out and work with their service coordinator if they have any questions on Medicaid and or the DD waiver. Many of the area agencies can provide support to individuals and their families in terms of what information is needed and how to apply for those.
Yeah. Thank you, Sheila. So kind of some final thoughts as we kind of wrap up the presentation portion of our conversation. Just some things that thinking about, it's good to consider as you kind of move forward and think about Project Search, is that even if your student is not yet of age for Project Search, that it's never too early to talk with your school team about the program. And I think the reason for that is just what we've been talking about now, is just that because of vocational rehabilitation and the area agency system being eligibility-based programs, and they're just needing to be process that's involved, and specifically with the area agency looking at application, for the funding stream and so on and so forth, it's really important that we're putting Project Search on the radar screen as early as we possibly can, so that it gives people enough time to really look at things and do the, planning and apply for services and so on. And it's also giving the different services, so vocational rehabilitation and the area agency the time that they need in order to determine eligibility for our programs. So, you know, and we've kind of talked about throughout the presentation as well, that really, you know, at minimum, you know, I think we should be giving ourselves 6 months, maybe more, of planning time ahead to ensure that the necessary eligibility and funding is in place. And if you're already eligible for the area agency and VR, that's even better, because that helps to eliminate sort of, you know, all of those different process pieces. And it's more of a matter of talking about, at that point, is Project Search an appropriate program for us to pursue? And, you know, I think, you know, from my perspective, it's a lot easier to come at it from that angle than when we're trying to come at it from the angle of, I've got to apply for these different services and kind of get myself going. So the other thing to think about as well is there could be certain times when funding isn't available from all of the funding partners that we've talked about this evening. And so when that is the case, and if, you know, and if there still is an interest, obviously, in wanting to pursue Project Search, that really is when you want to talk with your team about what other funding sources may be available. So, you know, could it be private pay? Could it be reaching out to some different community resources to see if there are grants, to see if there are scholarships, etc., that could help with the cost? So I think, you know, all of us, you know, here would say to you this evening, you know, planning, and conversations with your team as early as you possibly can have them is put you in a much better position to be thinking about Project Search. And in a lot of ways, you know, dare I say, I think it makes it a lot less stressful. And I think it's important too to really be talking about, you know, or rather to the different team members for your student about Project Search, because many of them obviously that have Project Search in their region are very familiar with the ins and outs. So being able to talk that through in a really, you know, in where you have some breathing room, I think is incredibly important. So now is the portion of the presentation where we welcome your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I know that Heidi is going to pause or stop the recording.